Reading through the early chapters of Genesis reveals a connected tragedy. These stories, from Eden to Babel, function as sequential stages of a massive system failure, the complete collapse of a perfectly designed world. Genesis 1 and 2 define the original architecture of that system. It is a precise, four-part blueprint designed for stability: God's people, God's place, God's rule, and God's blessing. The foundation consisted of God's people, humanity uniquely made in the Creator's image, dwelling in God's place. This was Eden, an environment engineered for humans to thrive in perfect relationship with their surroundings. Stability depended on God's rule, a simple instruction given for human protection. Living under that authority generated God's blessing, a state of total, uninterrupted harmony with the Creator and the world. This four-part harmony served as the original, flawless operating system for human existence. The destruction of this system began with a whisper, a subtle psychological probe from the serpent. The serpent targeted the structural integrity of the blueprint by planting doubt about God's word. By asking, "Did God really say?" he launched a direct attack on the pillar of God's rule. In what theologians call cosmic treason, Adam and Eve seized the authority to define good and evil for themselves. They shattered the pillar of God's rule, attempting to replace the Creator's authority with their own autonomy. This act of defiance triggered the immediate failure of the entire system. Without the central pillar of God's authority, the architecture of creation gave way. The fallout was immediate. Once the rule was rejected, the remaining pillars dissolved. Humanity lost God's place through exile, and God's blessing was traded for the weight of a judicial curse, physical pain, and death. The collapse rewired human nature. The original code of deep intimacy with God was overwritten by a drive for isolation and self-preservation. We see this corruption manifest first as shame. Adam and Eve suddenly felt exposed and not good enough, leading them to hide behind fig leaves of their own making to cover their unworthiness. Their view of the Creator also distorted into fear. They no longer saw a father, but a threat to be avoided, leading them to run from his presence. Finally, intimacy with others was replaced by blame. When confronted with their choices, Adam blamed Eve and God, while Eve blamed her circumstances, turning on others to protect themselves. Shame, fear, and blame became the new default operating system. In the perished kingdom, self-protection is the primary objective of the human heart. This internal corruption quickly manifested as external history. The localized glitch in the garden went viral, spreading violence across the earth. In Genesis 4, the vertical rejection of God's rule leads to horizontal bloodshed. Cain murders his brother Abel, demonstrating that once the relationship with the Creator is severed, relationships with others turn lethal. The biological reality of the collapse is recorded in the genealogies of Genesis 5. The text repeats a chilling rhythmic phrase, "and then he died." It serves as constant proof that the warning of death was true. By Genesis 6, human corruption reached a point of total depravity. In the flood, God reversed the order of Genesis 1, allowing chaotic waters to violently dismantle the land as a direct response to a world that had become only evil all the time. The spiral reached its peak at the Tower of Babel. Here, humanity unified in a project of absolute pride, attempting to build an autonomous empire that would make a name for themselves, independent of God. This progression, from a single murder to global depravity and finally an empire of pride, reveals a pattern of escalating destruction that humanity seems unable to break. Let's compare the Edenic pattern with the perished kingdom. Under people, intimacy was replaced by fear. Under place, the garden was lost to a cursed earth. Rule shifted from obedience to human pride. Finally, the blessing of life mutated into pain and death. This shattered matrix is the definitive explanation for the broken world we inhabit today. Even amidst this wreckage, God began weaving a narrative of grace. He clothed Adam and Eve, protected the exiled Cain, and preserved a lineage through Noah. This grace is anchored in the proto-evangelium of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, the promise that a future descendant of the woman would one day crush the head of the serpent, destroying the source of corruption. The history leading up to Babel demonstrates a clear trajectory. Human autonomy leads only to further scattering and decay. These early chapters prove that if the kingdom is to be restored, the intervention must come from outside the system. This desperate need sets the stage for God to call Abraham, beginning a new chapter in the recovery of the world. It creates the historical vacuum that only a second Adam can eventually fill.